60 to get it passed, so you need Democrats on board. Phil Mattingly, thanks very much for that. Let's get some more on all of this. Senator Chris Coons is joining us. He's a Democrat. He's a member of the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf. Always good to be on with you.
So pretty extraordinary. The White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, telling Democratic lawmakers in the House today that some of President Trump's campaign promises on immigration, a border wall, during the campaign were simply uninformed. What does that tell you?
Well, that's a fairly gracious way for General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, to say that what Trump was getting people to chant at all of his campaign rallies was implausible and unrealistic. The idea that we would ever build a concrete wall that stretches 2,000 miles from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean and get Mexico to pay for it was an implausible campaign promise at best. What he's now saying is that not only was that uninformed, it was also unworkable, that's really not a credible solution to securing our border. Here's the good news, I think, in the Senate, Wolf. There is a bipartisan bill that's been hammered out by Senator Graham, Senator Durbin, by 6 senators, Democrat and Republican, that makes the critical investments in controlling the border, in border security, that the Department of Homeland Security, the Trump administration, asked for this year, and that would solve DACA, the Dreamer problem. I think if that gets on the floor, it gets 60 votes. The question here is whether the president can hear yes, when he's the one who invited this group into the White House a week ago Tuesday and asked them to come up with a deal.
In that Reuters interview, the president says that's a terrible compromise, a terrible deal, and he says he's ready to blame Democrats if there is Friday night a government shutdown. What do you say to that?
Well, if it's never happened that the government has shut down when it's controlled by one party, where one party has the House, the Senate, and the White House. And your earlier reporting in this segment made it clear House Republicans, who have the majority, are struggling to get enough votes to pass their preferred version of a temporary funding bill. Even that version doesn't address things that all of us are looking to solve: community health centers, disaster relief funding, and DACA. So I hope that in the time we still have, the days between now and Friday, that Republican and Democratic leaders will sit down and hammer out the framework of a deal that the president will sign off on. If he won't, he's the author of this mess. He's the one who blew up this week, and frankly, the shutdown will be on him.
President Trump also told Reuters, Senator, that Russia is helping North Korea actually evade sanctions, international sanctions. Are you encouraged at least to hear the president hold Russia accountable?
Absolutely. I think this was a very constructive statement for President Trump to recognize what many of us have been briefed on, which is that North Korea is managing to evade China's partnership with the United States and the world community in enforcing sanctions to try and squeeze their economy, that Russia is actually helping them evade those sanctions. That's an important step forward for President Trump to recognize publicly that Vladimir Putin's Russian regime is not just being unhelpful, but is undermining our national security.
Steve Bannon, the president's former chief strategist, has struck a deal with the special counsel, Robert Mueller, to avoid testifying before a federal grand jury. He'll instead be interviewed by the special counsel's team. And now we know, thanks to this reporting from Axios, that Bannon revealed he had a conversation about that June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with the Russians. How significant is he as a witness?
Very significant. He played an important role in the campaign, in the transition, in decisions in the early days of the administration. In fact, I think he still has some real sway in this administration, even after his significant falling out with President Trump, if you just look at the actions of last week. I'll remind you, he may not be in front of a grand jury, but my attorneys advise me that federal statute provides that he would still face perjury charges if he were to be untruthful in testifying to the special counsel's investigators, and I think he's got a lot he could testify about.
The White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, says Congress should consult with the White House on executive privilege and on obtaining confidential material. Would you consider that? You're a member of the Judiciary Committee.
Look, what's been reported about Steve Bannon's testimony to the House Intelligence Committee, that he was consulting with the White House during his testimony, that he was asserting some sort of executive privilege that would have attached to his service on the campaign and on the transition. Even conservative Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy recognized that that is twisting executive privilege out of all recognition. The Republicans and Democrats on that committee promptly subjected him to a subpoena. I think it's important that we have clear direction on the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee about what the contours are of executive privilege. The White House has to assert it. It's the executive who has the privilege they can assert, not former employees.
Senator Coons, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Just ahead is the White House Chief of Staff.